Thank you, Ms Bardell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. The UK hospitality is an integral part of our national economy, and we can't consider this debate without also considering the impact of tourism. It is worth, of course, £127 billion to our economy, 9% of our GDP, and hospitality alone is £56 billion, with 2.5 million people working in it and 233,000 businesses directly related to it. I started off my career waitering in Royal Hospital and the Queen's Gallery. I also served in a cocktail bar in rural Dorset. You can imagine how successful that was. But it is also a perfect way of entering into the working environment, placing service at the centre of its values and making sure that people across this country can enjoy the fine local produce that we produce across this country. But of course it has been deeply impacted by the pandemic, by lockdowns, by the tightening of belts, and of course also by the strikes. And for those of you who were attending the UK hospitality event yesterday, you will have heard time and time again by how many of these businesses that have been impacted by rail strikes across this country, costing them hundreds of millions of pounds each year. Of course there needs to be an answer to this, and perhaps the Minister might make some remarks to it. But over the course of the last 4 years, an industry, a sector that has been routinely hit by lockdowns, pandemics, by strikes, has had a great deal of help from the government, whether it was the Eat Out to Help Out scheme or the campaign that I led, Ms Bardell, on reducing VAT to 5% by getting Conservative colleagues from across Parliament to support a reduction, temporary though it may have been, to 5% in parity with what our European friends and neighbours have done. And the results of that cut to 5% were enormously successful. Businesses across the country are still calling out for that reduction, which is why I think the honourable gentleman from Stirling, who has done so well to call this debate, will find there is very little opposition when it comes to reducing VAT. But that 5% proved that actually you could create a sustainable business model for the tourism and hospitality sector to thrive, to give them the resilience to weather certain shocks, to maintain the fact that there would be confidence in the sector overall. We've also, of course, looked at how we could change licensing rules. We've taken a far more European approach about allowing businesses to operate outside on pavements, which has been enormously successful in places like mine across South Devon. But the challenges still remain. The challenges for the whole sector are that there are labour shortages, that VAT is still high, that the energy costs are still hitting them, that business rates need to be reviewed, and as I've said already, about strikes. I'd like to make one point around labour, because I think in each of our constituencies we will have hotels, pubs, bars and restaurants that are absolutely suffering at the idea of labour shortages. And so I would just like to make this point to any colleague in here and anyone watching this at home. Within the terms of the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement, there is something called the Working Holiday Visa, which is for anyone between the ages of 18 and 35 who will be able to come over here for 3 years without any visa requirement, starting in July. No businesses seem to be talking about this, and it is our job as members of Parliament to go back to our businesses and to tell them about this, because this will make a very real and significant difference to their labour shortages if they are able to prepare for it and capitalise for it when it comes in July this year. Now, as I've said already around VAT, we are absolutely aware that it worked in terms of that difficult moment during the pandemic to reduce VAT to 5%, to give them that headroom to be able to continue to not have high tax bills, but actually to be able to supply their customers and indeed pass on some of those savings. But where we are different to Europe is that Europe has lower VAT rates, but also has quite high tourism level taxes. And we have to have a discrepancy to this. And my proposal to the government is something I hope a little bit more simple, is you do a 10% reduction on VAT. And I know it's very easy for us backbenchers to say 10% reduction on VAT, and that doesn't, you can figure out the cost. But do it on a sliding scale over a 5-year period in which you are reducing VAT by 2% each year over the next 5 years, so you can get down to a level that is actually fair and acceptable to a sector that has gone through so much. As has already been said around business rates, we do need to make sure they're passing on. It is disappointing that when we have been generous in government, we haven't seen the devolved administrations passing that on. And again, the honourable gentleman said he was disappointed by his own government's actions in this area. And finally, just around strikes, we must end the train strikes. They are causing, whether you are in London or any other city in this country, or even in rural areas like South Devon, we must absolutely get to a point where we are looking to deal with the strikes and stop this unbelievably catastrophic stranglehold on our tourism and hospitality sectors. Finally, Ms Bardell, whether you are staying at the Berryhead Hotel, drinking Salcombe beer or Hunt cider, or still on dry January enjoying Luscombe's drinks at the Pig's Nose, the Barrel House, the Durrant Arms, the George, the Queen's Arms, the King's Arms, or the Morley Inn, or just visiting Gara Rock, and eating the crab shell, the seahorse or rockfish, it is important to remember that they are all a great deal closer than any of those fine establishments than in Cornwall, and you can reach them far more easily. So thank you very much.